Hello, my dear patriots, or just simply Baron von Trump fans. So I'm going to start at the top of chapter 3 since I got interrupted with that yesterday. So to sum up, Ivan more and more troublesome. Bulger watches him closely. So Ivan is the guy who's been hired to take his sled further up north. Is that all right? Okay. Bulger watches him closely. His cowardly attack upon me, my faithful Bulger to the rescue, a driver worth having, how I was carried to a place of safety in the hands of my old Juliana, the Giant's Well. When we halted for the night, it was only by threatening the man with severe punishment upon my return to Hitch that I could bring him to rub his horses dry and feed and water them properly. But I stood over him until he had done his work thoroughly, for I knew that no such horses could be had for love or money in that country, and if they should go lame from standing with wet coats in the chill night air, it might mean a week's delay. Scarcely had I thrown myself on the hard mattress which the tavern keeper called the best bed in the house, loud and boisterous talking in the next room. Ivan was drinking and quarreling with the villagers. I strode into the room with the arrows of indignation shooting from my eyes and the faithful Bulger close at my heels. The moment Ivan saw us, he shrank away, half in earnest, half in jest, and called out, "Hey, look at the Mazunchik, little dandy. How smart he looks. It frightens me. See his eyes, how they shine in the dark. Look at the little demon on 4 legs beside him. Save me, brothers, save me. He will throw me down the Giant's Well. Marinka will never see again, never. Save me, brothers." "Peace, peace, fellow," I called out sternly. "How darest thou exercise thy dull wit on thy master? Get thee to bed at once, or I'll have thee whipped by the village constable for thy drunkenness." Ivan clambered up on top of the bake-oven and stretched himself out on a sheepskin. Then turning to the tavern keeper, I forbade him under any pretext whatever to give my servant any more liquor to drink. Vasha prishiglevet utvo. No idea what that means. "Ah, your excellency," exclaimed the tavern keeper with a gesture of disgust. "The fools never know when they have had enough. It matters not what the tavern keeper may say to them. They tell us not to spoil our own trade. Ugh! They don't know when to stop. They have throats as deep as the Giant's Well." "The Giant's Well, the Giant's Well," I murmured to myself, as I again threw myself down upon the bag of hay which did service as a mattress for those who could afford to pay for it. It's strange how those words seem to be in every peasant's mouth, but I thought no more about it at that time. Sleep got the better of me with my usual good night to the elder Baron and the gracious Baroness, my mother. I dropped into sweet forgetfulness. So this next sentence, I really do adore it. It is an entire paragraph, and it is one very long sentence. And keep in mind that they're in Russia, even though I keep switching back and forth between all kinds of British Isle accents. "It is a good thing that I had the power of falling asleep almost at will, for with my restless brain ever throbbing and pulsating with its own overabundance of strength, ever tapping at the thin panels of bone which covered it, like an imprisoned inventor pounding on his cell door and pleading to be let out into the daylight with his plans and schemes, I should simply have become a lunatic. As it was, with the mere power of thought, I ordered sweet slumber to come to my rescue, and so obedient was this good angel of mine that all I had to do was simply set the time when I wished to awaken, and the thing was done to the very minute." So I just want to insert here that the New Thought movement, the whole idea of being able to master, manifest your circumstances with your mind and your consciousness, I wonder if it was in the culture at that time or who knows. But I do know, for example, people like Neville Goddard and Ernest Holmes and the New Thought movement, religious science, which is not the same as Scientology, is all basically the same idea. And Emerson and Thoreau actually are kind of precursors to that whole thing. Anyway, it's interesting, right? "As for Bulger, I never pretended to lay down any rules for him. He made it a practice of catching 40 winks when he was persuaded that no danger of any kind threatened me. And even then, I'm half inclined to believe that, like an anxious mother over her babe, he never quite closed both eyes at once." Though entirely sobered by daybreak, yet Ivan went about the task of harnessing up with such an ill grace that I was obliged to reprove him several times before we had left the tavern yard. He was like a vicious but cowardly animal that quails before a strong and steady eye, but watches its opportunity to spring upon you when your back is turned. Sounds like the mainstream media. I not only called Bulger's attention to the fellow's actions and warned him to be watchful, but I also took the precautions to examine the priming of the brace of Spanish pistols which I thrust into my belt. He's got a carry thing. License. We had scarcely pulled out onto the highway when a low growl from Bulger aroused me from a fit of meditation. And this growl was followed by such anxious whine from my four-footed brother as he raised his speaking eyes to me that I glanced hastily from one side of the road to the other. Lo and behold, the treacherous Ivan was deliberately engaged in an attempt to overturn the tarantass, which is that big horse-pulled wagon, and to get rid of his enforced task of transporting us any farther on our journey. "Wretch!" I cried, springing up and laying my hand on his shoulder. "I perceive very plainly what thou hast in mind, but I warn thee most solemnly that if thou makest another attempt to overturn thy wagon, I'll slay thee where thou sittest." For only an answer, and with a lightning-like quickness, he struck a backhand blow at me with the loaded end of his whipstock. It took me full in the right temple and sent me to the bottom of the tarantass like a piece of lead. For an instant, the terrible blow robbed me of my senses, but then I saw that the cowardly villain had turned in his seat and had swung the heavy-handled whip aloft with intent to dispatch me with a second and surer blow. Poor fool, he reckoned without his host, for the shriek of rage, Bulger leapt at his throat like a stone from a catapult and struck his teeth deep into the fellow's flesh. He roared with agony and attempted to shake off this unexpected foe, but in vain. By this time I had come to a full realizing sense of the terrible danger Bulger and I were both in, for Ivan had dropped his whip and was reaching for his sheath knife. But he never gripped it, for a well-aimed shot from one of my pistols struck him in the forearm, for I had no wish to take the man's life, and broke it. The shock and pain so paralyzed him that he fell over against the dashboard, half in faint, and then rolled completely out of the wagon, dragging Bulger with him. The horses now began to rear and plunge. I saw no more. There was a noise as the roar of angry waters in my ears, and then the light of life went out of my eyes entirely. I had swooned dead away. Time for a little chai and eggnog. What do you think? I know, it's kind of slow going. Very word long sentences. Can you believe that this is children's literature? Talk about the dumbing of America, right? Oh my God. Okay. It seemed to me hours that I lay there on my back in the bottom of the tarantass with my head hanging over the side, but of course it was only minutes. I was aroused by a prickling sensation in my left cheek, and as I slowly came to myself, I discovered that it proceeded from the gravel thrown up against it by one of the front wheels of the tarantass. For the horses were galloping along at the top of their speed, and there on the driver's seat sat my faithful Bulger, the reins in his teeth, bracing himself so as to keep them taut over the horses' backs, and as I sat up and pressed my hand against my poor hurt head, the whole truth broke upon me. The moment Ivan had struck the ground, Bulger had released his hold upon the fellow's throat, and ere he had had the chance to revive, had leapt up into the driver's seat, and catching up the reins in his teeth, had drawn them taut and thus put an end to the rearing and plunging of the frightened beasts and started them on their way, leaving the enraged Ivan brandishing his knife and uttering imprecations upon mine and Bulger's heads as he saw his horses and wagons disappear in the distance. So, do you get what's happening? Bulger had his teeth into Ivan's throat, and then he jumped back up into the driver's seat, and the horses were rearing wildly. He grabbed up the reins in his teeth and pulled them so that the horses knew to take off. And Baron is out, but he wakes up while this is happening, while they are moving forward under the keen direction of Bulger, the amazing dog. Now was it that a mad shouting assailed my ears, and I caught a glimpse of half a dozen peasants who, seeing this, as they thought, empty tarantass coming nearer and nearer with its galloping horses, had abandoned their work and rushed out to intercept it. Well, didn't they see a dog was driving it? Judge of their amazement, dear friends, as if their eyes fell upon the calm and skillful driver bracing himself on the front seat, and with oft-repeated backward tosses of his head, urging the horses to bear his beloved master farther and farther away from the treacherous Ivan's sheath knife. So here's the dog with the reins in his teeth. My goodness. Hope they turn this into a movie. Sorry. As the peasants seized the animals by the heads and brought them to a standstill, the horses, I staggered to my feet and threw my arms around my dear Bulger. He was more than pleased with what he had done and licked my bruised brow with many a piteous moan. Sir Nicholas, save us! This Sir Nicholas is a favorite saint of the time. And he's Santa Claus! Sir Nicholas, save us! Cried out one of the peasants, devoutly making the sign of the cross. But if I should live long enough to fill the giant's well with pebbles, I never would expect to see the like of this again. The giant's well! The giant's well! I murmured to myself as I followed one of the peasants to his cot, standing a little back from the highway, for I stood sore in need of rest after the terrible experience I had just had. The blow of Ivan's whip handle had jarred my brain, and I was skilled enough in surgery to know that the hurt called for immediate attention. As good luck would have it, I found beneath the peasant's roof one of those old women, half-witches perhaps, who had recipes for everything, and who knew an herb for every ailment. After she had examined the cut made by the loaded whip handle, she muttered out, "It is not as broad as the mountain, nor deep as the giant's well, but it's bad enough, little master." So I just want to throw in here that witch actually means wise woman. And they just had herbal remedies, the first naturopaths. And what happened to them? Strange parallel. No, but that doesn't come into this story. The giant's well again, I thought, as I laid me down on the best bed they could make up for me. I wonder where it may be, the giant's well, and how deep it is, and who drinks the water that is drawn from it. Chapter 4. This is Juliana, and she's going to come into the story for just a brief period. So I'm sorry, you're going to have to put up with the accent that I've made up for her, because I like it. My wound heals, Juliana talks about the giant's well. I resolve to visit it. Preparations to ascend the mountains, what happened to Juliana and to me. Reflection and then action, how I contrived to continue the ascent without Juliana for a guide. It was a day or so before I could walk steadily, and meantime I made unusual efforts to keep my brain quiet. But in spite of all I could do, every mention of the giant's well by one of the peasants sent a strange thrill through me, and I would find myself suddenly pacing up and down the floor and repeating over and over again the words, "Giant's well, giant's well." And I did look that up, and it was really trippy. This guy wrote this story, but it's just like this. You just keep scrolling down, and it's this well that gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and it was like, ooh, it just made me uncomfortable. Same as Scott something. And I do wonder if it refers to, I don't know, so just, maybe there's a connection, maybe it isn't, but I'm just going to keep throwing them out there. Deep underground military bases? I don't know. Anyway. Bulger was greatly troubled in his mind and sat watching me with the most bewildered look in his loving eyes. He had half a suspicion, I think, that the cruel blow from Ivan's whip handle had injured my reasoning powers, for at times he uttered a low, plaintive whine. The moment I took notice of him, however, and acted more like myself, he gamboled about me in the wildest delight. As I had directed the peasant, I just have to say, when your dog thinks that you're crazy and not quite yourself, they do get a little nervous. As I had directed the peasants to drive Ivan's horses back towards Hitch on the Hitch, some town, until they should meet that miscreant. That's a great word, isn't it? Miscreant. And deliver them to him. I was now without any means of continuing my journey northward, unless I set out like many of my famous predecessors, on foot. They had no longer legs than I, however, and were not loaded with so heavy a brain in proportion to their size, and a brain, too, that scarcely ever slept. At least not soundly. I was too impatient to reach the port. So it was my predecessors weren't near as smart as I am, so, I do have an advantage. Okay. I was too impatient to reach the portals of the world within a world, to go trudging along a dusty highway. I must have horses and another tarantass, or at least a peasant's cart. I must push on. My head was quite healed now, and my fever gone.
Hearken, little master,
whispered Juliana, such was the name of the old woman who had taken care of me.
Thou art not what thou seemest. I never saw the like of thee before. If thou wouldst, I believe thou couldst tell me how high the sky is, how thick through the mountains are, and how deep is the giant's well.
Dun, dun, dun! I smiled, and then I said, Didst thou ever drink from the giant's well, Juliana? At which she wagged her head and sent forth a low chuckle.
Hearken, little master,
and then whispered, coming close to me and holding up one of her long bony fingers.
Thou canst not trick me. Thou knowest that the giant's well hath no bottom.
Gah! No bottom, I repeated breathlessly as Donfum's mysterious words, the people will tell thee, flashed through my mind. No bottom, Juliana. Well, you're the news now, so I must believe you. Sorry.
Not unless thine eyes are better than mine, little master, she murmured, nodding her head slowly.
Listen, Juliana, I burst out impetuously. Where is this bottomless well? Thou shalt lead me to it. I must see it. Come, let's start at once. Thou shalt be well paid for thy pains.
Nay, nay, little master, not so fast. It's far up the mountains. The way is steep and rugged, and the paths are narrow and winding. A false step might mean instant death. And were there not some strong hand to save thee, give up such a mad thought as ever getting there, except it be on the stout shoulders of some mountaineer.
Ah, good woman, was my reply. Thou hast just said that I am not what I seem, and thou saidst truly. Know thou then seest before the world-renowned traveller Wilhelm Heinrich Sebastian von Trump, commonly called the Little Baron Trump, that though short of stature and frail of limb, yet what there is of me is iron. There, Juliana, there's gold for thee. Now lead the way to the giant's well. It is I, the little baron. Gently, gently, little baron, almost whispered the old peasant woman as her shriveled hand closed upon the gold piece. Yeah, there's gold for thee. So he hands her a gold piece to pay her.
I have not told thee all. For leagues about I seen no living being excepting me knows where the giant's well is.
Ask them, and they'll say, it's up yonder in the mountains, away up under the yews of the sky. Yews, like, That's all they can tell thee. But little master, oh, this is her talking, sorry. Oh, see, when I do the sheep. It's time for a little sheep break. No, it's not. There's not a little sheep in there. Sorry, I have to have another little sip of chai. Chai nog. Okay, about the yews of the sky.
Ask them and they'll say, it's up yonder in the mountains away up under the yews of the sky.
It might be the eyes of the sky, because this book has tons of typos, and this is page 17, although, you know, the rewriting of it, this probably aren't the original pages.
That's all they can tell thee. But, little master, I know where it is, and the very herb that cured thy hurt head and saved thee from certain death by cooling thy blood was plucked by me from the brink of the well. Those words sent a thrill of joy through me, for now I felt that I was on the right road, and the words of the great master of all masters, Donfum, had come true. The people will tell thee. So she's saying these herbs that I used to save you, I plucked them from the edge of the well. Aye, the people had told me, for now there was not the faintest shadow of doubt in my mind that I had found the portals to the world within a world. Juliana should be my guide. She knew how to thread her way up the narrow pass, to turn aside from overhanging rocks which a mere touch might topple over, to find the steps which nature had hewn in the sides of the rock parapets, and to pursue her way safely through clefts and gorges, even the entrance to which might be invisible to ordinary eyes.
Reminds me of a Star Trek episode I just saw last night. That's exactly what happened. I gave it out that I was about to betake myself to the mountains in search of curiosities for my cabinet, and begged them to furnish me with ropes and tackle. So he said, "Oh, I'm just a treasure hunter, and I just want some curios for my cabinet. So I need you to fit me out, like with all the ropes and stuff. Like, I'm nobody important." Begged them to furnish me with ropes and tackle, with 2 good stout fellows to carry it for me, promising generous payment for their services. They made haste to provide me with all I asked for, and we set out for the mountain path at daybreak. Juliana, in order not to seem to be of the party, had gone on ahead by the light of the moon, telling her people that she wished to gather certain herbs before the sun's rays struck them and dried the healing dew that bended their leaves. Isn't that pretty? They made haste to provide me with all I asked for, and we set out for the mountain path at daybreak. Juliana, in order not to seem to be of the party, had gone on ahead. I just read that. All went well until the sun was well up over their heads, when suddenly I heard a woman, who proved to be Juliana, utter a piercing scream. In a moment or two the mystery was solved. The old bedlam came rushing down the mountain, her thin wisp of grey hair fluttering in the wind. Her hands were tied behind her, and 2 young peasants with birchen rods were beating her at every chance they caught. Turn back, brothers!" they cried to my 2 men. "The little wizard there has struck hands." Oh, the young men are saying this. The little wizard there has struck hands with this old witch. They're on their way to the giant's well. They'll loosen a band of black spirits about our ears. We should all be bewitched. Quick, cast off the loads of ye bearing and follow us. Cast off the loads you're bearing and follow us. So this giant's well, apparently there are rumors that scary things come up out of it, and that is true in Tonopah. Is that what it's called? One of the bases where weird creatures come out because they're doing some creepy experiments down there. Anyway, Tonopah, that's what it's called. Miara Isley. The 2 men didn't wait for a second bidding, and throwing the tackle on the ground, they all disappeared like a flash, but for several moments I could hear the screams of poor Juliana as these young wretches beat the old woman with their birchen rods. Ooh, isn't that just awful? Children's literature? Well, dear readers, what say you to this? Was I not in a pleasant position, truly, alone with Bulger in that wild and gloomy mountain region? Well, didn't you care that the old woman was being beaten? Gah! Anyway, he sees the positive in it, which is another minor point that I would like to see, is that the DJT definitely practices the laws of attraction, and he sees the positive. His answer to the question, when they asked him about Greta Thunberg, he said, "I see a happy young woman with a bright future." Sorry, okay, hold on. I mean, this is what the page looks like. Good Lord. Was I not in a pleasant position, truly? Alone with Bulger in that wild and gloomy mountain region, the black ropes hanging like frowning giants and ogres over our heads, and the dwarf pines for hair, clumps of white moss for eyes, vast gaping cracks for mouths, and gnarled and twisted roots for terrible fingers ready to reach down for my poor little wizen frame. Did I follow trembling? Did I make haste to follow those craven spirits down the mountainside? Did I shift the peg of my courage a single hole lower? Not I! If I had, I wouldn't have been worthy of the name I bore. What I did do was to throw myself at full length on a bed of moss, call Bulger to my side, and close my eyes to the outer world. He's a little freaked out, and he's like, so what I did was I sat myself down to meditate. I think that's really cool. I have heard of great men going to bed at high noon to give themselves up to thought, and I had oft done it myself before I had heard of their doing it. So like they didn't have done it, because I thought of it before I ever heard they were doing that. In 15 minutes, by nature's watch, the sun on the face of the mountain, I had solved the problem. Now there were two difficulties staring me in the face, namely to find somebody to show me the way up the mountain, and if that body couldn't carry my tackle, then to find somebody else who could. It suddenly occurred to me that I had noticed some cattle grazing at the foot of the mountain, and what's more, that these cattle wore very peculiar yokes. Now, this is a very strange little description, and I'm going to do my best to kind of sum it up at the end. So he's going to describe something for you that you've probably never seen. What are those yokes for? Okay, so a yoke is something that goes around the neck of like a cow, and it usually extends out to the side, but this is described as round. So I'm thinking it's like a collar. What are those yokes for? I asked myself, for they were of a make quite different from any that I remembered ever having seen, and consisted of a stout wooden collar, from the bottom of which there projected backward between the beast's forelegs and a straight piece of wood armed with an iron spike pointing toward the ground. At the top yoke was bound a leather thong to the animal's horns, so long therefore as the beast held his head naturally, or even lowered it to graze, the yoke was drawn forward, and the hook was kept free from the ground. But the very moment the animal raised his head in the air, at once the hook was thrown into the ground, and he was prevented from taking another step forward. Okay, so this thing is around this cow's neck, and when he's bending down, the hook lifts off the ground. But as soon as he looks up, the peg would dig into the ground and prevent him from moving forward. It's a very clever device, and I just can't help but draw an analogy that the machinations, the purpose of the deep state is to keep us from looking up and moving forward. It kind of struck me. Now, dear readers, you may or may not know that when a cleft-hoofed animal starts to ascend a steep bank, unlike a solid-hoofed beast, he throws his head into the air instead of lowering it, and therefore it struck me at once that the purpose of this yoke was to keep the cattle from making their way up the sides of the mountain and getting lost. I don't know if that's true, but that's fascinating. Cloven-hoofed animals, like a horse doesn't have a cloven hoof, it's one solid hoof, and they keep their head down when they're climbing. But if they have a cloven hoof, like a pig or a cow or a dog, they look up when they're climbing, and maybe it's because with being cloven, they can be a little more sure-footed. So, because it's cloven-hoofed, he knows that it would raise its head to climb the hill, meaning that it's being prevented from climbing the hill, meaning that it had climbed the hill before. Therefore, it struck me at once that the purpose of this yoke was to keep the cattle from making their way up the sides of the mountain and getting lost. But why should they want to clamber up the mountain sides? Simply because there was some kind of grass or herbage growing up there which was delicacy to them. Yummy grass. And knowing, as well I did, what risks animals will take and what fatigue they will undergo to reach a favorite grazing ground, it struck me at once that if I would make it possible for them to reach this favorite food of theirs, they would be very glad to give me a lift on my way. Very clever. He's going to use them for transportation. He's like, I'll make it easy for you to get your mouth on some very tasty grass. And would you carry my stuff? I think he's found somebody to schlep his stuff. His shizzle. No sooner said than done. I forthwith retraced my steps until I fell in with a group of these cattle, and it did not take me many minutes to loosen their yokes from their horns and tie up the hooks under their bodies so that the progress uphill would not be interfered with. They were delighted to find themselves so unexpectedly freed from the hateful drawback which permitted them merely to view the covered grazing grounds from afar, and then having cut me... They can only see the greener grass, but they can't get there. And he frees them up to get there. And then having cut me a suitable goad, I again started up the mountain, driving my new friends leisurely on ahead of me. Upon reaching the spot where the superstitious peasants had thrown the tackle to the ground, I proceeded to load it up upon the back of the gentlest beast of the lot, and was soon on my way again. Chapter 5, let's just keep going.
up a hill, maybe it's up a steep hill, and through the quarries of the demons, how the cattle kept the trail, and how we came at last upon the brink of the giant's well. The terraces are safely passed. Beginning of the descent into the well itself, all difficulties overcome, we reach the edge of Polyphemus funnel. This is kind of a long and arduous journey, isn't it? Generally speaking, people with very large heads are fitted out by nature with a pair of rather pipe-stemmy legs. But such was not my case. I was blessed with legs of the sturdiest sort and found no difficulty in keeping pace with my new four-footed friends who, to my delight, were not long in convincing me that they had been there before. Not for an instant did they halt at any fork in the path, but kept continually on the move, often passing over stretches of ground where there was no trail visible, but coming upon it again with unfailing accuracy. Once they had halted, and that was to slake their thirst at a mountain rill, Bulger and I following their example. It was only too evident to me that they had in mind a certain grazing ground, and were resolved to be satisfied with no other. So I let them have their own way, for as it was still up, I felt that it was perfectly safe to follow their lead. At last the mountainside began to take on quite another character. The gorges grew narrower, and at times overhanging rocks shut out the sunlight almost entirely. We were entering a region of peculiar wildness, of fantastic grandeur. I had often read of what travelers termed the quarries of the demons in the northern Urals, but never till now had I the faintest notion of what the expression meant. Imagine yourself the usual look of ruin and devastation around and about a quarry worked by human hands. Then in your thoughts conceive every chip to be a block, and every block a mass. Add 4 times to its size to every slab and post and segment, and then turn a mighty torrent through the place, and roll and twist and lift them up in wild confusion, end on end, and on each other piled, till these wild waters have built fantastic portals to temples more fantastic, and arched with wild gorges, with roofs of rock which seemed to hang so lightly that a breath or footfall might bring them down with terrible crash. And then, dear friends, you may succeed in getting a faint idea of the wild and awful grandeur of the scene which now lay spread out before me. That was one sentence. Come on. And I really don't know what he's just describing the way the rocks look and how, like, fantastic it is. Maybe he's imagining how a glacier carved it out or something. I don't know. Would the cattle that had now led Bulger and me so safely up the mountainside know where to find an entrance to this wilderness of broken rock? And what was more important still, would they... Oh, so this is a question. When once engaged with its winding courts and corridors, its darkened maze of wall and parapet, its streets and plazas roughly paved as if by demon hands impatient of the task, know how to find their way out again? Dear friends, man has always been too distrustful of his four-footed companions. They have much that they might tell us, had they but speech to tell it with. I have often trusted them when it would have seemed foolhardy to you, and never once have I had cause to repent of doing so. So I've always trusted animals, and I've never regretted it. So Bulger and I, with stout hearts, followed straight after these silent guides, although I must confess my legs were beginning to feel the terrible strain I had put them to. But I resolved to push ahead, at least until we had cleared the demon's quarry, and then to bring my little herd to a halt and pass the rest of the day in the night season in well-earned repose. Once within the quarry, however, all sense of fatigue vanished, and my thankful mind, entranced and fascinated by the deep silence, the awful grandeur, the mysterious lights and shadows of the place, lent me new strength. At length we had traversed this city of silence and gloom, and once again we emerged into the full glory of the afternoon sun. Isn't it marvelous? This is Max. Suddenly, my little drove of cattle
with playful tossing of their heads, broke into a run, Bulger and I at their heels, however. It was a mad race, but, dear friends, when it ended, I took off my fur cap and tossed it high into the air with a wild cry of joy, and Bulger broke out in a string of yelps and barks, for look ye, the cattle were grazing away for dear life there in front of me, and as their breath reached me, my keen nostrils recognized the odor of Juliana's herbs, which she had bound on my hurt head. I think they've gotten to the entrance of the giant's well. In the morning the cattle were nowhere to be seen, but I didn't trouble myself about them, for I knew that old Juliana would be sent up after them the moment they were missed. After a hearty breakfast on half a dozen roasted eggs of the wild fowl, and with some dried fruit and wintergreen berries, I skipped a whole paragraph. It's probably, okay, it's 2 sentences. Yes, we stood almost upon the brink of the giant's well, but I was too tired to take another step farther, too tired, in fact, to eat, although I had a stock of dried fruit in my pockets and had noticed that the nests of the wild fowl were well supplied with eggs. Having unloosened the tackle from the back of the good beast that had carried it up the mountain for me, I threw myself on the ground and was soon fast asleep with my faithful Bulger coiled up close at my breast. In the morning, the cattle were nowhere to be seen. But I didn't trouble myself. As soon as they'd been missed, hearty breakfast, roast egg, wild fowl, and some dried fruit and wintergreen berries, Bulger and I advanced to the edge of the giant's well, or rather to the edge of the vast terraces of rock leading down to it, each of which was from 30 to 50 feet in sheer height. Oof. Before I go any farther, but dear friends, I must beg you to remember that I am an expert in the use of tackle, there being no knot, no noose, or splice known to a sailor which I didn't have at my fingers' ends, a fact not to be wondered at when you take into consideration the thousands of miles which I had traveled on water. Like, of course I knew about knots. I spent a lot of time at sea. I know. Nor would I have you shake your heads and look only half persuaded when I go on describing our descent into the giant's well, for of course you'll be asking yourselves how I succeeded in getting the tackle down when there was none left at the other end to untie it. Know, then, that was the smallest of my troubles, for as any sailor will tell you, you need only tie your line in what is known as a fool's knot, to one end of which you make fast a mere cord. The moment you have reached the bottom, a sharp tug at the cord unties the fool's knot and your tackle falls down after you. My method was to lower Bulger down first and then let myself down after him. In this way we proceeded from parapet to parapet until at last we stood upon the very edge of the vast well, the existence of which had been so mysteriously hinted at in Don Fum's manuscript. Its mouth was probably 50 feet in width, and by straining my eyes I satisfied myself on the existence of a shelf rock on one side, as nearly as I could judge about 75 feet down. It was a goodly stretch, and would require every foot of my rope. You will not smile, I'm sure, when I tell you that I pressed Bulger to my breast and kissed him fondly before lowering him away. He returned my caresses, and by his joyous yelp gave me to understand that he had perfect faith in his little master. In a few moments I had joined him on this narrow shelf of rock. Below us now was darkness, but think you I hesitated? I knew that my eyes would soon become accustomed to the gloom, and I also knew that when my eyes failed, Bulger's keen ones were there to help me out. I rigged my tackle now with extra care, for I was really lowering my little brother on a sort of trip of discovery. He was soon out of sight, and then, in spite of my calmness, I drew a quick breath, and my heart started upward a barleycorn or so. But hark, his quick, sharp bark comes plainly up to me. It means that he has landed on a safe shelf or ledge, and the next moment my legs encircled the rope, and I began to glide noiselessly down into the stilly depths, his glad voice ringing in my ears. Again and again I did send my wise and watchful little brother down ahead of me, until at last, standing there and looking up, naught remained to me of the mighty outside world but a bright silver speck, like a tiny ray of light streaming through a pinhole in the curtains of your chamber. But stop, we have reached the bottom of the giant's well, or have we? For with a trial plummet I find that the walls are no longer sheer, they slope inward, and gently too, almost so much like that I hardly need a line to continue my descent. Lighting one of my little candle, I make my way cautiously around the edge. In half an hour I find myself back at the starting place. The curve to the path has always been the same, while my trial plummet
at all times has indicated the same slope to the rocky basin. And then for the first time, two certain words made use of by that learned master of masters, Don Fum, till then a mystery to me, stood out before my eyes, as if written with a pen of fire upon those black walls thousands of feet below the great world of light which I had quitted a few hours before. Those words were Polyphemus Funnel. Yes, there could be no doubt of it. I had reached the bottom of the giant's well. I stood upon the edge of Polyphemus Funnel. So Polyphemus, he's a cyclops, and I did a bunch of research into him, and none of it seemed to be too relevant. But what he's describing is that as he's going down, these walls go like this into a funnel. And what is at the bottom of a funnel? A straight thing that goes down. And this next chapter may give you the heebie-jeebies. I shall continue, for it's only 2 or 3 pages, but it'll take a long time. Chapter 6. My despair upon finding the pipe of the funnel too small for my body, a ray of hope breaks in upon me, a full account of how I succeeded in entering the pipe of the funnel, my passage through it, Bulger's timely aid, the marble highway, and some curious things concerning the entrance to the world within a world. So this, my friends, is going to be a very long description of how he greases up his mostly naked body and goes through this really skinny funnel by having rocks attached to his feet and Bulger at the bottom, giving a sharp tug and pulling him safely through. Ooh, it's a bit claustrophobic. Do I even need to read it? You know what? I think I'm going to skip over it because that's all that happens. Yeah, I'm not going to read it. So he just like makes himself as little as possible and manages to, but he gets down to the bottom and he realizes he has to corkscrew himself all the way down. And then he's still there and he's like, oh my God, I'm never going to get it. I'm going to die here. And then Bulger gives him a quick little tug. Okay, and then there's something about the light. Wow, we just saved a lot of time right there. Let's see. So there's a marble highway, and it's when he gets down in there and like wipes himself off and puts his clothes back on. Oh, and he's convinced that Bulger has piled up his clothing perfectly underneath where he was going to fall to save him from breaking his legs, and he piled it up just perfectly. They weren't thrown higgledy-piggledy into a heap either, but were laid one upon the other, the heaviest at the bottom. That dog! Having unwound myself and lighted one of my wax tapers, I made haste to cast away the undergarment with its coating of black lead. So the black lead is some slimy thing that it was, allowed him to, it was probably oil. And resume my clothing. Then stooping down, I made an examination of the floor. It was composed of huge blocks of marble of various colors, polished almost as smooth as if the hand of man had wrought the work. And then I knew that I was on nature's marble highway, leading to the cities of the underworld, which Don Fum had mentioned in his book. And I remembered, too, that he had spoken of nature's mighty mosaics, huge, fantastic figures on the walls of those lofty corridors. Huge figures down underground. And we know that Abraham Lincoln, well, there is a story of Abraham Lincoln having visited one of these deep underground chambers where there was a giant in stasis. I'm sorry, I don't remember where I read about that, but I do think that this guy was friends, Ingersoll, with Abraham Lincoln. So who knows what this guy knew, right? Huge, fantastic figures on the walls of those lofty corridors, made up of various colored blocks and fragments laid upon one another as if with design, and not as if by design, and not with the wild tempestuous winds of upbursting forces thousands of years ago when the earth was in its mad and wayward youth. After a rest of several hours, during which I nursed my torn hands and bruised fingers, Bulger and I were up and off again along this broad and glorious marble highway. Strange to say, it was not the inky darkness of the ordinary cavern which filled these magnificent chambers, through which the marble highway went winding in stately and massive grandeur. Far from it. The gloom was tempered by a faint glow that met us on the way ever and anon, like a ray of twilight gone astray. Anyway, Bulger
Anyway, Bulger, I noticed, could see perfectly well, so tying a bit of twine to his collar, I sent him on ahead, convinced that I could have no surer guide. At times our path would be lighted up for an instant by the bursting out of a little tongue of flame, either on the sides or from the roof of the gallery. I was puzzled for quite a while to tell what it proceeded from, but at last I caught sight of the source, or rather the marker, of this welcome illumination. It proceeded from a lizard-like animal, which, by suddenly uncoiling its tail, had the power to emit this extremely bright flash of phosphorescent light, and in so doing he made a sharp crack, for all the world like the noise of an electric spark. Bulger was delighted with this performance, and on one occasion, not being able to control his feeling, he uttered a sharp bark, whereupon apparently 10,000 of these little torchbearers snapped their tails at me, and at the same instant, and filled the vast place with a flash of light almost lightning-like in intensity. Bulger was so frightened by the result of his applause that he took good care to keep quiet after this. So I can't resist. I want to explain that. So there are all these little lizards on the wall, and when they uncoil their little tails, it makes a snapping sound and just like a flash of lightning, like a flint or something, and it's kind of bluish phosphorescent. And Bulger was noticing this, and so he barked, and when he did it, boom, they all did it at one time, and it just lit up the whole cave like lightning for a second, and it freaked Bulger out, so he's like, I'm not going to do that again. Okay, we're at 45 minutes. I'm just going to keep going. Chapter 7. I confess, I have not read through this yet. Our first night in the underworld, and how it was followed by the first break of day, Bulger's warning and what it meant. We fall in with an inhabitant of the world within a world, his name and calling, mysterious return of night, the land of beds, thank God, and how our new friend provided one for us. So heavy with sleep did my eyelids become at last that I knew it must be night in the outer world, and so we halted, and I stretched myself at full length on that marble floor, which, by the way, was pleasantly warm beneath us, and the air, too, was strangely comforting to the lungs, there being complete absence of that smell of earth and odor of dampness so common in vast subterranean chambers. My sleep was long continued and most refreshing. Bulger was already awake, however, when I sat up and tried to look about me. If you've heard the reports of the tunnels under the Bosnian pyramid, you'll rememberize that it has a very healing effect on people. So this is interesting. He began tugging at the string, which I had fastened to his collar as if he wanted to lead me somewhere, so I humored him and followed along after. To my delight, he led me straight to a pool of deliciously sweet and cold water. Here we drank our fill, and after a very frugal breakfast, on some dried figs, set out again on our journey along the marble highway. Suddenly, to my more than joy, the faint and uncertain light of the place began to strengthen. Why, it seemed almost as if the day of the upper world were about to break, so delicate were the various hues in which the ever-increasing light clothed itself. Then, as if affrighted with its own increasing glory, it would fade away again to almost gloom. It sounds kind of like the northern lights, but in sunrise colors. Ere many moments again this faint and mysterious glow would return, beginning with the softest yellow, then changing through a dozen different tints, and like a fickle maid uncertain which to wear, put all aside and don the lily's garb. White? I don't know. Bulger and I wandered along the marble highway, almost afraid to break the stillness so deep that it seemed to me as if I could hear those sportive rays of light in their play against the many-colored rocks arching this mighty corridor. Now as the marble highway swept round in a graceful curve, a dazzling flood of light burst upon us. It was the sunrise in the world within a world. Whence came this flood of dazzling light which now caused the sides and arching roof to glow and sparkle as if we had suddenly entered one of nature's vast storehouses of polished gems? Shading my eyes with my hand, I looked about me in order to try and solve the mystery. My guides are going ting, 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 and telling me to tell you something. Yes, I'm psychic. So, I have a friend that was publishing stuff and perhaps even did an interview or a video on the Inner Earth quite a while before our beloved Corey Good came out with his experience. And they're telling me that she may be willing to talk to us a bit about it.
And if that's the case, I'll make another video sharing screens with her if she's into this, and she can talk about her experience. You know who you are. It did not take me long to understand at all. Know then, dear friends. Let's see, did I read this part? It was sunrise and the world within the world. Yes. Once came this flood of dazzling light. What is it? It didn't take me long to understand it at all. Know then, dear friends, that the ceilings, domes, and arched roofs of this underground world were fretted with a metal of greater hardness than any known to us children of sunshine, than those of us up above. It seems, okay, so think of like the seams in a leaf that fan out. He's describing that there are like these lines, these seams up on the ceilings and walls. Its seams ran hither and thither like the veins of gigantic leaves, and at certain hours currents of electricity from some vast internal reservoir of nature's own building streamed through these metal traceries until they glowed with a heat so white as to give off the flood of dazzling light of which I have already spoken. The current never came with a sudden rush or burst, but began gently and timidly, so to speak, as if feeling its way along. Hence the beautiful tints that always preceded sunrise in this lower world, and made it so much like the coming and going of our glorious sunshine. Hence the beautiful tints that always preceded sunrise in this lower world, made it so much like the coming and going of our glorious sunshine. Sometimes there are sentences here that are technically not sentences, unless I take out a word, which I did there. The marble highway now divided, and the two halves of the fort curving away to the right and left enclosed a small but exquisitely ornamented park, or pleasure ground, I might call it, provided with seats of some dark wood, beautifully polished and carved. This park was ornamented with 4 fountains, each springing from a crystal basin and spreading out into a feathery spray that glistened like whirling snow in the dazzling white light. As Bulger and I directed our steps towards one of the benches with the intention of taking a good rest, a low growl from him warned me to be on the alert. I gave a second look. A human being was seated on a bench. Beside myself, as I was, with curiosity, to come face to face with this inhabitant of the underworld, the first we had met, I made a halt, determined to ascertain if possible, whether he was quite harmless before accosting him. Gotta find out if he's innocent and harmless before I knock him over the head. Well, that was kind of you, Baron. He was small in stature and clad entirely in black, a sort of loose flowing robe, much like a Roman toga. His head was bare, and what I could see of it was round, smooth, and rosy, with about as much hair, or rather fuzz, upon it as the head of an infant 6 weeks old. His face was hidden by a black fan which he carried in his right hand, and the uses of which you will learn later on. His eyes were shielded from the intense glare of the light by a pair of colored glass goggles. As he raised his hand between me and the light, I couldn't help catching my breath. I could see right through it! The bones were as clear as amber, and his head, too, was only a little less opaque. Suddenly, two words from Don Bomb's manuscript flashed through my mind, and I exclaimed joyously, "Bulger, we're in the land of the transparent folk!" At the sound of my voice, the little man arose and made a low bow, lowering his fan to his breast where he held it. His baby face was ludicrously sad and solemn. "Yes, Sir Stranger," said he in a low musical voice, "thou art indeed in the land of the Micamankes, and in parentheses, Mica men, M-I-C-A, Mica men, in the land of the transparent folk, also called Goggle Land." Only one letter different from Google. Goggle Land. "But if I should show thee my heart, thou wouldst see that I am deeply pained to think that I should have been the first to bid thee welcome. For know, Sir Stranger, that thou speakest with Master Coldsoul, the court depressor, the saddest man in all Goggle Land, and by the way,
Sir, permit me to offer thee a pair of goggles for thyself, and also a pair for thy four-footed companion, for intense white light would blind thee both in a few days. It's like, sorry, I'm the saddest guy you'll ever meet. Can I give you some goggles? They'll keep you from going blind in a couple of days with all that bright light. I thanked Master Cold Soul very warmly for the goggles and proceeded to set one pair astride my nose and to tie the other in front of Bulger's eyes. I then in most courteous manner informed Master Cold Soul who I was, and begged him to explain the cause of his great sadness. Well, thou must know, little Baron, said he, after I had taken a seat beside him on the bench, that we, the loving subjects of Queen Galaxa, whose royal heart is almost run down, excuse these tears, living as we do in this beautiful world so unlike the one you inhabit, which our wise men tell us is built, strange to say, on the very outside of the earth's crust, where it is most exposed to the full sweep of blinding snow, freezing blast, pelting hail, drowning rain, and choking dust, living as we do, I say, in this vast temple by nature's own hands built, where disease is unknown, and where our hearts run down like clocks that may have but one winding, we are prone, alas, to be too happy, to laugh too much, to spend too much time in idle gaiety, chattering the time away like thoughtless children amused with baubles, delighted with tinsel nothings. Know then, little Baron, that mine is the business to check this gaiety, to put an end to this childish glee, to depress our people's spirits, lest they run too high. Hence my garb of inky hue, my rueful countenance, my frequent outflowing of tears, my voice ever attuned to sadness. Excuse me, little Baron, my fan slipped then. Didst thou see through me? I would not have thee see my heart today. For some way or other I cannot bring it to a slow pace. It is dreadfully unruly. I assured him that I had not seen through him as yet. And now, dear friends, I must explain that by the laws of the Micamenkes, each man, woman, and child must wear in their garments a heart-shaped opening on their breast directly over their hearts, with a corresponding one at the back, so that under certain conditions, when the law allows it, each may have the right to take a look at his neighbor's heart and see exactly how it is beating, whether fast or slow, whether throbbing or leaping, whether pulsating calmly and naturally. But this privilege is only accorded, as I have said, under certain conditions, hence to shut off inquisitive glances, each Micamenke is allowed to carry a black fan with which to cover the heart-shaped opening above described, and in this way conceal his or her feelings to a degree. I say to a degree, for I may as well tell you right here that falsehood is unknown, or, more correctly stated, impossible in the land of transparent folk, for the reason that so wondrously clear, limpid, and crystal-like are their eyes that the slightest attempt to say one thing while they are thinking another roils and clouds them as if a drop of milk had fallen into a glass of the purest water. Oh, this makes me very excited, dear friends. We're both reading this chapter for the first time right now, and my heart is very lightened and is beating more quickly because this is exactly how extraterrestrial species of like fifth dimension and higher, that's exactly how they are. They can't, like Emery Smith talks about this, how there's telepathy and there's no lying. They can't hide anything. The transparent folk. And also, Corey Good describes the inner earth people as being of a higher dimensional consciousness. I don't know exactly what, maybe it's higher density. My understanding is that there are 7 densities within each dimension. So maybe the inner earth are a slightly higher density than we are. But anyway, this is really cool. Okay, how much left? We just have about a page to go, which is probably another half hour. No, just kidding. Okay, so they can't lie. As I sat gazing at the strange little being seated on the bench there beside me, I recalled a conversation which I had had with the learned Russian at the Solvitchegodsk. Said he, speaking of his people, "We are all born with light hair, brilliant eyes, and pale faces, for we have sprung up under the now."
could be a typo there because there's a weird little symbol just before the word now. And this isn't uncommon with this publishing. By the way, I tried to research SRP. It's the only print on this book that gives you a clue as to its publishing company. And what's really weird and serendipitous about that is that there's an SRP publishing company here in the very town where I live, which is fairly small. And then as I kept hunting and searching, I found this article that was published on my birthday, which was really weird. And also, one of Trump's forebears died on June 6, 1966. His grandmother, June 6 is my son's birthday, and I was born in 66. So, this kind of stuff just keeps happening. So, sorry, let's just hang in here for the next couple of paragraphs. Okay. We are all born with light hair, brilliant eyes, and pale faces, for we have sprung up under the now. And I thought to myself how delighted, how entranced he would have been to look upon this curious being, born not under... Oh, the snow! That's what the little symbol was supposed to be, was an S. We have all sprung up under the snow. And I thought to myself how delighted, how entranced he would have been to look upon this curious being, born not under the snow, but far under the surface of the earth, where in these vast chambers of this world within a world, this strange folk had, like plants grown in a dark, deep cellular, gradually parted with all their coloring, until their eyes glowed like orbs of pure crystal, until their bones had been bleached to amber clearness, and their blood coursed colorless through colorless veins. While sitting there, following out this train of thought, the clear white light suddenly began to flicker and to play fantastic tricks upon the walls by dancing in garbs of ever-changing hues, now brightest yellow, now palest green, now glorious purple, now deepest crimson. That's cool. "Ah, little Baron!" exclaimed Master Coldsoul. "That was an uncommonly short day. Rise, please." I made haste to obey, whereupon he touched a spring on the bench opened in the center, disclosing two very comfortable beds. "In a few moments night will be upon us," continued the Mikkamenky. Mikkamenky, let me spell it for you. Mikkamenky. Mikkamenky. "But thou seest that we have not been taken by surprise. I should explain to thee, little Baron, that owing to the capricious manner in which our river of light is apt both to begin and to cease flowing, we are never able to tell how long a day or night will prove to be. This is what we call twilight. In my world, I suppose day goes on with a terrible bang, for our wise men tell us that nothing can be done in the upper world without making a noise, that your people really love noise, and that the man who makes the greatest noise is considered the greatest man." Those who cry the loudest. "Owing to the fact, little Baron, that no one in Goggle Land can tell how long the day will last or how long it may be necessary to sleep, our laws permit no one to set any exact time when a thing shall be done." So it is the land of now. "Or to exact any promise to do this or that on a certain day, for bless thy soul, that day may not be 10 minutes long. Hence we say, if tomorrow be over 5 hours long, come to me at the beginning of the 6th hour, and we never wish each other a plain good night, but say, good night as long as it lasts. What's more, little Baron, as night is apt to come upon us in this way unawares, by law, all the beds belong to the state. No one is allowed to own his own bed, for when night overtakes him, he may be at the other end of the city, and some other subject of Queen Galaxa may be in front of his door. And no matter where night may overtake a Millamenky, he is sure to find a bed. There are beds everywhere. By touching a spring, they drop from the walls. They pull out like drawers. They are under the tables, in the divans, in the parks, in the marketplace, by the roadside, benches, bins, boxes, barrows, and barrels. By pressing a spring, may in an instant be transformed into beds. It is the land of beds, little Baron. But I behold, the twilight goes to its end. Good night as long as it lasts." And with this, Master Coldsoul stretched himself out and began to snore, having first carefully covered up the 2 holes in the front and back of his garment, so that I shouldn't have a chance to take a peep through him in case I should wake up first.
Bulger and I were right glad to lay our limbs on a real bed, although from the way my four-footed brother followed his tail around and round, I could see that he wasn't particularly delighted with the softness of the couch. And that ends our reading for today, friends. I love you. Where we go one, we go all.